discuss the book Environmental Economics in Developing Countries, Issues and Challenges, edited by Dr. Achiransu, Acharyya, and released just a few months ago by Routledge. Now, to introduce Dr. Acharyya briefly, he is an assistant professor at the Department of Economics at Vishavarthi University, and previously taught at IIM Ahmedabad and at University Kolkata. His areas of specialization include natural resources and environmental economics, agricultural economics, and the economics of water resources. He is also the chief editor of a water-related journal called Indian Groundwater, and an associate editor of the Bengali Social Sciences Journal, Published. Of course, we have the editor himself to tell us more about the book, and he will in a couple of minutes. But just by way of introduction, environmental economics in developing countries examines the environmental challenges faced by nations of the global south in a post-pandemic world. It draws some case studies from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa to reflect on the impact that economic development and of course the COVID-19 pandemic itself have had on the environment, ecology and economy of these regions. It also looks at some of the responses and countermeasures that have been taken, including those by environmental economics networks, and several such networks in fact have been helping build local capacities and leadership so that sustainability issues can be addressed better. We're delighted to have an excellent panel with us, which will be chaired by Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, the director of ORF Kolkata and the president of INSEE. So a special word of welcome to our speakers today, Professor Sugata Hazra from Jadavpur University, Professor Jeena Srinivasan from the Center for Economic and Social Studies, Professor Pranab Mukhopadhyay from the Goa Business School, and Professor Sumana Mukhopadhyay from Calcutta University. That's really great to have all of you here with us. The final note before the chair takes over. This book has been edited in honor of the late economist Professor R.N. Acharyya, some of whom all the speakers and panelists today have shared a close association. So, much like the book itself, today's event, today's gathering, is also a tribute to the memory of Professor Acharyya, who passed exactly a year ago last September. So, with that, I'd like to request Dr. Ghosh, the chair, to take the proceedings forward. Thank you.
Discussion of this particular book, Environmental Economics in Developing Countries, Issues and Challenges, edited by Achiransu, Acharyya. As Nilanjan mentioned, this book has been written in honor of, or rather edited in honor of Professor Acharyya, who has been employed in the domain of environmental economics. And he has also served as an executive committee member of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics, which I am presiding at this point in time. As far as INSEE is concerned, INSEE essentially has been offering this platform for practicing environmental economics, and more specifically, in fact, broadening the domain of ecological economics in South Asia. So this debate often came up, how do we delineate this entire scope of ecological economics? That's more so because there has constantly been a conflict and some kind of what we call the cognitive dissonance, as also scholastic antagonism between the scholars in this domain working in the interface of ecology, environment, society and economics, on whether environmental economics is opposed to ecological economics should subsume environmental economics, or is it the other way around? So where do we stand at this point in time? And this is the question that we have been striving ever since 1998 when INSEE was formed. And I'm glad that when I'm chairing this panel, I have with me two former presidents of INSEE. One of them who is an economist, and one of them who has been a polymath, working in the domain of the interface of environment, society, policy, engineering, science, and economics. So I gratefully acknowledge the presence of Professor Bandyopadhyay, who presided over INSEE between 2006 and 2008, and Professor Pranab Mukhopadhyay, who is a panelist today, teaches at Goa University, and has been the president between 2018 and 2020, 2016 and 2018. Well, both of them contributed to the society in various ways. Jeena also served as the secretary of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics. Now the question is, why should ORF, as a policy research think tank, take up a subject like this particular book, which is largely academic in nature, contributed by a host of academicians, especially when in fact the primary work of ORF has been in the domain of policy making and policy research, and contributing to the larger policy domain. The question is that how do we make ecological economics more relevant for policy? This is something that INSEE has never thought of, ever since its existence. That is more so because there have been extremely low think tank presence or policy presence as far as Indian Society for Ecological Economics is concerned, and it has largely been dominated by academicians, A, and B, which those who know INSEE intrinsically, they will definitely appreciate the fact that it has been infested by economists, barring possibly Professor Sumana, who happens to be a geographer. So, largely, in fact, when we tried to develop an interdisciplinary or a transdisciplinary framework to develop the scope or enhance the scope of ecological economics, we have been failing as far as South Asia is concerned. So, how do we do that? So, this book discussion is essentially a pretext. Rather, we should treat this next 1.5 hours to discuss that scope of ecological economics here. We should debate, we should discard hypotheses, we should bring this book, in fact, as one of the central themes, but discuss the theme around which this book has been edited and written. And more importantly, we at least try to push the frontiers of the discipline by questioning some of the fundamental hypotheses which we have treated as stylized facts. So that is essentially the idea of taking this up as far as ORF is concerned, and this is where possibly ORF and INSEE converge in terms of certain objectives. So given this, I'm not going to take any further of your time, but what I will do is I will request at the very outset Achiransu to make an anchor presentation of this book. As we all know that this book has been edited in honor of who has essentially contributed substantially to the literature of environmental economics and the practice of environmental economics in India. But frankly speaking, despite the fact that we practiced environmental economics, he always had this broad vision of ecological economics, and that is why in one of the INSEE conferences when we thought of a theme of global change, which was not in the ambit of the reductionist neoclassical framework of environmental economics, he subscribed to it and supported that. So let me now turn to Acharyya to make that presentation on the basis of which the interventions can take place from the panelists. Acharyya.
Discussing about my book, and I'm also thankful to Anikwan and Nilanjan for it. So essentially, this book, before I talk about this book, I would like to just pay my homage to the person who died yesterday. Dr. Swaminathan was the father of the Green Revolution, and I thought perhaps it's remembering Professor Acharyya would also like to remember Dr. Swaminathan. So, this book, talking about the book, it's available in both the international version, and I'm thankful to Routledge and Francis that they have brought out an Indian South Asian version also. So both the versions are available, and the Indian version is the right one, which costs around 1,500 rupees. So I'll just talk a little bit about this book, how it started. So actually, we used to meet in coffee house, Professor Acharyya and me every Sunday morning, and we used to talk about all kinds of things. So once we came up with this idea of having a book on environmental economics. Now, Professor Routledge already had a book from Oxford on environmental economics, but that was pretty old. So we were thinking of having something new, on that area. And then suddenly it came to my mind that why don't you have a book in your honor? And he was a very down-to-earth person, very simple at heart, and he felt very shy that who would write for me. And then I said, okay, so let me try, let me see, you know a lot of people and a lot of people know you. And I approached many economists, environmental economists, and the first person who said that yes, if you are having a book, I am going to write the foreword to the book, was Sir Parthu Dasgupta from Cambridge University. So that started the whole process, and after that, whoever I approached, most of them, they agreed to contribute a chapter. So the book went, and I don't want to talk much about Professor Acharyya. I think everyone here knows about him. So I'll just get into the book now. Professor Jeffrey Vincent, he is a postgrad distinguished professor in forest economics at Duke University. I'm very grateful to him that he agreed to write about the book. And this is what he says. Professor Bhattacharya's research in environmental economics ranges from the micro to the macro, from investigations of common property resource institutions on land and at sea to the interrelationships between economic growth, energy consumption, and climate change. So, that is the whole essence of the book. It has several parts, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about this introduction. So, when I was writing this book, Sir Parthu Dasgupta was doing a work on biodiversity. He was writing a report on the biodiversity for the British government, and we had some interactions, and he wrote a few emails to me where he said, the whole process of this modernization after the Second World War has been anti-nature in its process, and he was worried about that what's going to happen at the end of the whole story of this anti-nature kind of development. So he was speaking about the second 5-year plan and the development of these dams and the big industries, and how it was done through the process of science and technology. So it was science and technology that used to rule the whole process of planning, and then these three incidents came up. One was the Kipko movement, and then the Narmada Bachao Andolan, and the pollution at Bhopal, where a lot of people died. So perhaps these were some of the issues that raised the concerns about the environment and what development can do to the environment. And from here onwards, things perhaps change a little bit for India. So taking that into account, we have also taken the COVID-19 impact, because that was also an environmental impact. So looking at the vulnerabilities of the anti-nature kind of development in the socio-economic system globally, and what are the risks that it pertains to on human health, the economy, and society. So mainly the book talks about the environmental challenges faced by developing economies in a post-COVID-19 world. And here I have, I'll just talk a little bit about what Sir Parthu Dasgupta had to write in the foreword. So he mentions that, that the interplay between macro and micro had never considered the attention of the farmers, the fishermen, the woodlanders, the grazers, and these are not taken as natural capital assets. So the ecology and the natural environment is never taken as a capital asset. We look at capital asset more of the manufactured products, but we don't look at the natural assets. So that is one of the poverty of the academia, that they don't look into this natural asset as a capital asset. Environment, ecology and development, economics of nature conservation, climate change and development, economics of environmental policy, and altogether there are 15 chapters divided more or less equally. And all these 4 things are based on the fact that it's all discussing about the nature of development in a post-ecological vulnerability scenario. And most of the authors who have contributed, as I mentioned, are extraordinarily good in their own subject. So we had people like M.N. Murthy, Professor Kanchan Chopra, Professor Sumana, Professor Sengupto, and Jyoti Padi from India, David Simpson, Shushmita Dasgupta, Anil Madhandia, Mani Nepal, and Priya Shamsundar. So I just talk a little bit about the characteristics of the chapter, which is that how to look at the Kuznets curve. So one could be that there is both a market failure and a free rider. So if that happens, then the poverty also goes up, and the environmental quality also goes down. So both the things can happen together. On the other hand, it could be that as income rises, people get more aware of the environment, and then the Kuznets curve falls. So these are some of the issues that he discusses in the Ramsey optimal growth model, that kind of a model. And then there are a few chapters on the COVID-19 and its impact. One chapter is by Pushpam Kumar, who talks about the nexus between the natural capital, the pandemic and development, and what are the solutions to this natural capital, the nexus between biology and economy. And then Professor Sengupta talks about the neo-Malthus sediment. He talks about Malthus's theory that that there would be a food shortage, it would lead to an ecological crisis. So whether that is coming up, and then we have Jadavpur talking about pandemic and climate. Professor Acharyya was an expert in the forest economics. So we have a paper by this Sumana on the insectic-based approaches to nature conservation, and then David Simpson talks about the carbon sequestration, and there's one more chapter by Stella Scones and others on the rural household space, established tree cover. So that's one part, and then we have another part on climate change and vulnerability and development by Anil Markandeya and his team from the World Bank, who talks about the regional climate vulnerabilities in South Asia. And I have a chapter on climate smart agriculture, and Jyoti Parikh has a chapter on pandemic climate change and sustainable development. At the time the policies are being watered down in India, the environmental policies. So Kanchan Chopra has written a good paper on the retrospect and recent developments. Then Mani Nepal on the gender and risk management. It's a kind of practical paper, and the same thing about electric fencing by Priya and others. So I'll end with this one concept of sustainable development that I found in Dasgupta and Melo, that the concept of sustainable development should accommodate both political and ecological concerns, and in practice this will involve the achievement of a socially necessary growth rate for developing countries, while at the same time supporting environmental protection and improvement in the future. So I'll just end with some of the ideas that I was looking at of Tagore and rural reconstruction, and we had this idea of the Atmashokti and the Polli Prokriti and the Samabhai Niti. So maybe some of those issues we can look at in our process of discussion, because I think he showed a path to education and development, natural ecology and development. So perhaps we have missed that out. So I will end with a quote from Tagore: "The highest education is that which does not merely give us information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence."
Well, without much ado, let me go to Jeena. So I'll start with an economist, then I'll go to scientists from other disciplines.
Good evening all. First of all, thanks to the ORF Foundation for inviting me to this function. It is a pleasure to be here. Let me at the outset congratulate the ORF for bringing us such a fantastic management. Am I audible? I don't know how to begin with this discussion. Dr. Nilanjan has said a broader scope for when he has raised some crucial issues that we need to take up during this discussion. I work in the area of environmental economics, but I really don't know how to address some of the issues he has raised in his remarks. Before I get into that, let me also give my view to considering So I'll begin by putting today's discussion topic in perspective and connecting to the book that let me try to do that. So climate change, development, and natural capital is a conundrum in the world of economics. That is what, as far as I understood, we are supposed to be discussing today. Is the backdrop of the book. And I say in terms of, there are at least three major aspects here. One is the relationship between environment and climate change. And we all know that it is now well recognized that higher levels of economic growth, the traditional reducing lots and lots of natural capital, including the fossil fuels, contribute to a lot of greenhouse gas emissions and it impacts on the climate. And we have realized that it is not sustainable. And we have already I understood that we have to reduce our emissions, but how to accomplish that, and what are the ways by which we can accomplish that? That's one issue. On the other hand, the development itself, like the way the rampant uncontrolled development can happen, that can also lead to the degradation of natural resources. For example, the pollution we face everywhere, the biodiversity loss, the loss of ecosystem services. It means that there is a trade-off. If you are talking about more and more development, then you are also losing something else. And the third thing is that the impact of climate change on the natural capital. So the climate change can also alter the natural capital because the increasing temperature and the frequent extreme climatic events, all that can have an impact on natural capital, and all this diminish the capacity of the natural capital to provide goods and services on a long-term basis, on a sustainable basis, which again has an impact on human welfare and the existence of life on goods. So this is a challenge, like how we balance it. How can we balance it? What sort of development we can pursue so that everything is in balance? So this is the conundrum that we are facing, because some of the policies that we try to focus may have extremely adverse impact on the other. So there is a need to balance all this. The conundrum, so what is the role of economics in addressing this conundrum? So how can we really pursue our goal of achieving sustainability? To me, economics plays an important role to guide us how the system can work, what to produce, and how to distribute the production of whatever we have produced. All this has an important bearing on what we can contribute to the system. So this book actually precisely addresses some of these issues. Environmental economics, as the title shows, it is largely focusing on the environmental economics part, which is mostly the neoclassical framework which has been adopted in this book, and as Dr. Achiransu has summarized the content of the book. So what I just pick up few things from the book so that we can add to the conversation. So this book basically explains the theories, the analytical framework in economics that can be applied to understand the environmental and developmental way in the natural resources and climate change in a better way. So it provides analytical tools to look at the old problems in a new perspective, like the poverty issues. The poverty, we have been talking about poverty for a long time, but how do we pursue the poverty in a new light? So one of the articles shows that we need to go beyond the income criteria of poverty and also see the kind of access to common property resources, the personal assets, the autonomy that the people feel to define the poverty. So, and then it also challenges some of the conventional ideas of environmental perspectives, and it brings into the concept of environmental entitlement to understand the concept of poverty. That is one set of theories, one set of articles that the book brings us to give the perspective of how we can think in a newer way about the environment development. And then there are also articles which focuses on the mechanisms through which we can achieve that. Like, how can we conserve the natural resources? Again, the focus is more on the neoclassical approaches, where we can use various types of economic instruments for like taxes, fees, and all these are aimed to change the behavior of the people. How we can change the behavior of the people to a more sustainable manner. How the way we produce. So even one of the examples which I remember from the book is about using taxes and fees for the protection of forest areas. So whether the users can be charged. Why should the user or the people in the periphery always bear the cost of conservation? So that is a very unfair practice. So meanwhile, the book also introduces the need for the ethical consideration also in the whole process. So this is one thing which was striking to me, the ethical considerations of development and the newer way that we can approach this idea. Then always the trade-offs between different types of uses, the current and future uses, All these are highly relevant and highly still very contestable issues. The cost, the trade-offs, the trade-offs between one user and another. So, a lot of articles, many articles in the book, in fact, deals with this trade-off and how we can evaluate the various kinds of trade-offs. So, how we can employ the methodologies of economics to evaluate them and then come up with an informed policy decision making. How we can incorporate all this information into our decision making. So these are some of the crucial elements which I see from the neoclassical perspective that has been addressed in the book. And then one of the articles by Professor Chopra also talks about the environmental policy development in India. So here she points out the dilemmas. She in fact mentions that the environmental policy currently as it stands at the prospect. So there are different types of pressures to follow pursue different particular type of environmental policy, and in fact, raises also serious concerns about how the policy making is going on. It also the book also takes us to the discussion that when the policies was framed, how the theoretical aspects were concerned, like in the policy making. So all this, the book contributes to our understanding. Another aspect which I want to highlight, and that pertains to what Dr. Nilanjan has pointed out, is how we can go beyond the environmental economics and incorporate other disciplines, the perspective of us other disciplines. In fact, some of the articles, especially in the context of the pandemic and other articles, it is interdisciplinary in approach, and it brings our attention to the fact that environmental issues or the development issues cannot be resolved from one single disciplinary perspective, and we have to broaden our perspective to understand and to bring even the natural sciences and also the other social sciences into the fold in order to understand the problems very comprehensively. So there lies, I think, the importance of bringing ecological economics and the perspective of ecological economics into the analysis. Also, falling short of addressing some of the other issues and issues to take up for the discussion.
Economics diverging in each other with some of the forces of social sciences, but ethics, the normative principles, how we set them. Now, everything cannot always be set by the normative principles, which Dr. Pranab is here from WWF. For a long period of time, I presume that this entire domain of conservation was looked at from a normative ethical perspective, that respect life on earth. Now that since economics has been infused in it, now that we are looking at the value of life on earth. So why do we need to conserve? Precisely because conservation is a selfish human need, and that's why economics has contributed. So, and with that, I think that it's time to move towards the natural science. So nobody better than Professor Sugata, and also because he has worked so closely with Professor Acharyya. So and somehow there was some kind of a wedding between natural sciences and social sciences or economics in their works. So Professor Hazra.
I word and invite me to this gathering. I myself completely disagree. But probably because of my long association with Professor Jadavpur, who worked with us from 2006 onwards, School of Oceanographic Studies, Jadavpur University, where I think with our adjunct professor, I also started a chapter course on environmental economics that he used to teach to our students of science. But on the fishermen of Mukhopadhyay and how conservation, stringent laws of conservation are impacting the economic well-being. So you could delve into that kind of subjects, right? In 2018 with a collaborative transdisciplinary and transgovernmental project of DECMA, we did a lot of modeling, general economic theories and your models, GAM and trade theory, and we published with BC3. We thought environment is good. 2018 papers on data and how the social and economic well-being is affected by climate change. So it is very enriching for us, international scientists, and I rather like to raise few questions that we brought into Nilanjan and others, but from a completely non-economist point of view, because I find whenever you discuss economics or climate change, and then you start thinking about mitigation and cost of mitigation and how we can replace, but this is none of our concern. It is actually you are borrowing this concern from the West who have done this in their ground economy, and now they are trying to cope it up. They are trying to shift the burden developing the cost of life. Because this question you used to ask while myself, Nilanjan and Anurag took a project, that is actually not from the point of view of we are addressing climate change in Sundarban, but the impacts of that, and how people and the forest and the mangroves and the tigers can be saved at least partially from that. So it is a cost of adaptation that probably the Indian economists should be more bothered rather than cost of mitigation. It's good that you are doing the same kind of mathematics and same kind of modeling with tangents and curves, frequency curves and other things. So I think I'll restrict my discussion of today's book release because it's a fantastic book. I have never come across any this kind of paper that is covering 34 researchers from 10 countries contributing to environmental economics and in very contemporary topics like that, as we discussed. And I'll concentrate my discussion on the climate change, not on the climate change part, but on the COVID-19 part intentionally. It's a kind of ecological crisis created by this overconsumption and say the brown economy or whatever you call it, that has actually set no limit of human expansion into the realm of ecology. Human that we didn't pay attention to. But then when it culminated into a pandemic, then suddenly everything was closed down in a day or two. And why we were so irritated that we used to face disasters that was affecting mostly the rural marginal areas previously and underdeveloped countries, but this is the first time through the transportation of the vector, the virus, through air passages and airlines. It has reached the most developed countries, the cities and the urban centers, which are supposed to be the saving place for this kind of civilization, that 60% of population finally will live in this such urban areas by 2050, and they should be ready to face these kind of disasters in these urban centers, devoid of any kind of ecology or forest or beach or whatever. No natural system will ignore everything. So I think that the best part of this book has created this debate on climate change. I am not going to the detail, but what Pranab and say on whether it's a neo-Malthusian even or Jadavpur have tried to analyze it in a very positive, optimistic way that what we should learn from the pandemic, that in a very short time we could reduce the carbon emission, in a very short time we could change our lifestyle, we have gone digital. Though there are more waste because of carry bags and plastic packets and everything. But it was a drastic change in the way of life. So I think he wanted to convey a message that we can change our lifestyle and go for a more sustainable way of living without the pandemic. But he also emphasized that
well, there are a lot of dip in the carbon emission. That again, the West is very much bothered about. 4.2% dip was there by 2020, but you realize by 21, 22, it has got bounced back to 6.4%. We have started a record high. So we have not changed. The Ukraine and Russia is fighting post-pandemic period, and people are either supporting or taking advantage of that. 150 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent has been pumped in 1 year. Is a total budget of Belgium carbon dioxide. With warning can change our outlook on profit maximization without caring much more. So I think, this is an article by Pushpam Kumar, I think I must emphasize that he wanted to show some light at the end of the tunnel by quoting from Calcutta, that again I want to quote from the economics of biodiversity, to limit our growth to a safe operating limit and to function within regenerative capacity of the nature. I think here lies the transition from environmental economics and climate change to ecological economics, that we are forced to accept that there is a limit of growth, that there is a way that you cannot exceed a kind of threshold, and our development process or sustainable development process must admit that in a way, because even in your volume Kancho Chopra discussion paper, it's a very interesting one. In India are top down. Indira Gandhi and both Mohammed together and they have developed some policies that came back and first conservation policy like that. There was no bottoms up approach. So it was never accepted by the community that we have really not to kill tigers, not to kill elephants. Because even in your volume, I see a paper advocating for electrification around crop field or saving crop damage by wild animal. And you know that 2021, even now, there are a lot of elephant death by electrocution against such fences in Nepal. So, but still our policies and not adhering to the policies are more or less put together, and this is a very crisis point of ecological economics, that how we can factor in not the environment, CO2, water that we are factoring in, but nature, a living entity. Because another graph, what I find that in your book, and this is the most interesting part, because a book should answer some query, of course, but you should raise more questions than it can answer. So, what is the transition from, say, Greek to economy? What happened? Because a new area is getting exposed to it, and this is the ocean. And we have very little knowledge and very little economics on the ocean, not only about the trade and how much carbon emission is done by each ship or traffic, not like that, but also the biodiversity, the minute plantons, the value of that, how it reacts with the acidification of the ocean, what is the economic cost of mangrove, what is the economic cost of adaptation retreat from Sugata. So these are the areas which will be demanding involvement from the economist, and in that perspective, I think this volume remains extremely contemporary, relevant, and desirably debated. So I think I should end with that.
Institutions and the development banks. 85 to 90% of their financing portfolio is into mitigation, where 10 to 15% is into adaptation. This bias exists, and you are absolutely correct on that. Second point, which of course is provocative enough, and that too for this particular forum, is when you raise the issue of nature as it is. Deep ecology versus ecological economics. Deep ecology is not going to acknowledge existence of ecological economics, forget environmental economics. Ecological economics is much more anthropocentric than the ecology, also because we are talking in terms of the ecosystem services and not merely ecosystem structures and functions. War, pandemic, climate change, geoeconomic order change, geopolitical expansionism through China's market imperialism, and here comes geography. So,
I'd really like, because this book is dedicated to Hazra, I'd like to just briefly touch upon my experiences of learning from him. But many of you would have worked with him in partnership with projects and departments like Professor Acharyya, Professor Hazra. But I have learned from him as a student. It was when I registered for my PhD at IIT, and my supervisor, Professor Narayanan, introduced me to IEG to attend a workshop of my PhD scholars. And that's where I started learning about, because I was interested in working on the wetlands, the East Calcutta wetlands. I was exposed to a lot of methods and methods in environmental economics through studies on valuation. And my first paper was evaluated by Professor INSEE and Professor Jadavpur and Professor Sumana that we are having here today. What is essentially the difference between ecological economics and environmental economics, because that is where my learning started, at the starting point of my learning. So it was Professor Acharyya who actually encouraged me when I said that after learning a bit of methodologies, I wanted to introduce some of these methods incorporate this into the teaching of geography, practical work in urban studies and in my students' dissertations. And he was the person who encouraged me, and I found exactly how interdisciplinary research can be effectuated through this kind of confidence building that he gave. This compilation about this book, this compilation of by Professor Acharyya is of tremendous value to the geography students. Basically, this establishes the kind of connect between geography and environmental economics, or rather, if I don't use the word environmental geography and economics, which is where my specialization is in human geography, and as one of the branches of human geography, which is economic geography, I have learned a lot about the connect between geography and environmental economics. And what I felt was it has always been there, but we missed we have missed some opportunities in creating the focus, or rather putting them together as an interdisciplinary science. I found this interesting paper. I just noted it down. It was a paper in 2022 where the authors tried to explore the emergence of the interdisciplinary research by geographers and environmental economists together. What have we done as an interdisciplinary theme of research, or rather an interdisciplinary subject, evolution of the interdisciplinarity in the subject. And the authors here identified environmental economic geography, the term, as a search topic for the citation indices, and they found around 1098 journal papers from the citation indices of science, social science, and arts and humanities. And what was really interesting is that this revealed the kind of importance that was growing, which I felt was instilled in my way of thinking by Professor Acharyya at that point of time, and also my supervisor and a host of other people, stalwarts in environmental economics of the time, Professor Mukhopadhyay, whose paper is whose chapter is the first one in this book, and many others, other authors here. And the other was the impact of globalization on environment. And post 2011, that is the period between 2011 and 21, there were 755 papers. This shows the slow evolution, or the slow stepping forward of the interdisciplinarity in the work that we are, what I really wanted to focus on in this discussion as a student of geography. Now, if one looks at the topics or themes of these 755 papers, the largest frequency were 3 words: climate change, sustainability, 4 words: climate change, sustainability, China, and governance. That was very interesting. I found this very interesting. I really found this a kind of way to see what the, I usually do this for my dissertation students when they come to me when they start their dissertation, when I'm telling them and they ask me what topic should I do, ma'am, and the discussion goes on, and I tell them you look at, I usually take urban geography as a special paper, so I tell them you look at good journals like Environment and Urbanization or Urban Studies, select 4 to 5 journals, and you look at last 2 years publications, and you will find what is going on around the world. And from there you pick out topics which you find interesting, emerging, challenging, and more complex than a topic like socio-economic environment in slums. That's what we used to do for a very long time. Now, when we look at economic geography and we look at the essence of studying, the essence of economic geography being the study of spatiality, of economic activities, of where it focuses on where the economic activity is located, where the resource is located. That's what geography tries to answer. And when David Harvey, for example, talks about production of neoliberal space, he uses arguments like arguments of the capitalist mode of production vis-a-vis the question of social justice through accumulation and through dispossession. And on the other hand, we have Richard Peet, who is again a economic geographer, human geographer, who talks about power, geography of power. And when we talk of, when these debates come in, we are talking about power over access to resources, power over access to utilization of resources. That's where the whole, this kind of circuit is built between economics, environment, and geography. And a focus, I have myself invited Professor Nilanjan and Professor Dr. Anurag several times to speak to my students, because they were essentially working on geopolitical framework to discuss policy orientation. Because in the university about policy making and orientation towards policy research, it's a very difficult thing. I found over the years trying to motivate researchers to work to their last chapter, and it almost always works out. But the last chapter talks about very basic things to do, like we should focus upon interdisciplinarity and other things. So I just wanted to talk about 2 things here.
Given the fact that Ecological Economics started with the writings of Professor Bandyopadhyay and others, but largely we have really got into that. So now it's over to you to ponder over these issues. From the last intervention from economics.
Thank you, Acharyya, also sent the mail. I jumped at the idea because it's always great to come back to Calcutta and spend time with you. I hope you can hear me at the back. So I'm going to start with a small suggestion, and I'm really glad that Nilanjan said don't bring a PowerPoint. So some of the ideas that I have on these pages are notes I've made when I heard my co-panelists speak about. And I'm going to try and address the issues raised by Professor Acharyya in introduction to this book, Dr. Nilanjan, Ghosh, who always provokes reaction in ways that are unique to him, and of course Jeena has had a long history in INSEE doing and work. So first is a suggestion to all those who greatly benefited from Rohita's friendship and teachings and collegialities too. If we can have a Wikipedia page or something. So when I started thinking about what to say on this panel, I Googled him and I struggled to find much of it. So then I did what most, there's people who do comprehensive surveys, who do a Scopus database. I looked him up and there are 3 names I pulled up. And one of them was Rohita's. But it would be really nice to have a nice neat page where people who want to refer back to his work can go to and just find at least the list of papers that are out there, because he was a pioneer in environmental economics, not just for West Bengal, but for the whole country and South Asia as a region. And I think while this book does great service to his memory, for those of us who don't have access to this book or just want to know the different students he has created, like you, who are now second generation teachers of environmental economics spreading the word. I think it's extremely useful. If we have it, it's low cost, it doesn't cost very much. Some of those papers are already in the public domain, accessible. It's the way the West makes its literature more popular. There's no reason why we should. And it was only afterwards that we started using it, but by that time I had crossed that bridge and we couldn't go back to it. So I miss people like Rovindra in the classroom learning from him. The great thing about Rovindra was not only was he somebody who was very senior teacher, but he was also young learners. So as I said, he used to be the first week, part 4 used to be the second week, he's written your forward and he very fondly remembers Rovindra. Rovindra once said, do you think part 4 would migrate by sitting in his classroom? I negotiated, I not much of negotiation, I went and asked him, he said, yeah, of course, there's no problem at all. So Rovindra at his senior age was willing to sit in a classroom to see how somebody else teaches the subject. And that was a really nice thing that I take back from it, that there is no age to learning and you really don't have to worry about, if you have the time to engage, there is no reason why you should. And so they actually built up a very nice relationship between them. In the evenings they would sit and chat about their past and there are many common things that they finally discovered. One of the things Rovindra was knowing while we were taking a conference which Kolkata University had organized. Kushinji was very instrumental in that. We were driving back from Kolkata together and he said, Amit used to be my classmate. Amit was my teacher and he was in political economy. In later life, he got very engaged with the environment, but in his earlier life, he was somebody who was in a completely different domain. Environment was not part of his thing. And he said, this is where we converged. We were schoolmates, and then after that, he went on to do classical political economy. And now, in his later years, he's come back to environment because he feels that if you are going to solve the problem of sustainability and distribution, there is no other way to do it. Into the language that they speak, into something that evolves into a common solution. And that was something very important for me to learn, that while we can have different methodologies, but at least when the goal is a common one, we should try and see what kind of policy solutions we can have. And Johan later came on to visit us in our university and we used to often talk together. And I said, Johan, what do you think about environmental economics as a whole? And on a lighter moment, he said that, as long as they save the environment, I have no problem. So the bottom line, I think, was and he's a big thinker. He's one of those who doesn't mince his words. His works on the ecological economics of the poor, I think, was one of the classic books. He's worked with Ram Guha, he's engaged with all kinds of people. His whole experiment with Atlas is one of the definitional interventions in distribution of our person in Europe. Environmentalism of the poor. So, and this whole Atlas experiment that he's doing with his colleagues in Barcelona and across the world is extremely significant. So, I have another 6 minutes or so. Nilanjan talk about climate change, development, and natural capital and see the role of economics in it. And the only reason I think I can fathom this because economists are most comfortable amongst many other disciplines about trade-offs, and we are quite happy with trade-offs because that is our bread and butter. If there is no trade-off, economists have no role to play. If you have plenty of environment, if you are living in Bhutan with 70% under forest cover, you don't have an issue with pricing of ecosystem services, etc. But if you were, living in, also if you were living in Rajasthan, I guess, you would know the value of water, but you would be struggling. So there are two different extremes of the world in terms of ecosystem services to human beings. But if you look at this trade-off, the problem with bringing it into the domain of environmental economics is that we are dealing with an area where we know very little about. And which is why is that? It's because environment and ecological domains are not something that naturally come to markets. And when there is no markets and there are no prices, then economists have to put on a thinking cap and ask, proposing definitional changes in the way economists think, but proposing tools by creating artificial markets, bringing in stated preference methods, which have been questioned, but they have actually put forth a debate where
how do you define what is, you were saying, what is the value of life? What is the value of clean water? And till the time that Richard Carson's efforts came in, we really didn't have a flag point to enter the debate. And even though you stated preferences, and it's not something that I would readily go to, but they open chapters of areas where nobody has ever gone before. And I think this is where we make a difference in the way we intervene in policy. And I think I would just take a moment to say that, INSEE it's true, we are largely economists, we are largely academics, but we have had a huge impact on policy which often goes understated. I'll give you a few examples. First one is the whole issue of the CAMPA funds. The CAMPA funds are compensatory funds that are being brought in. It comes from the Godavari case. And who did the court turn to for expert advice? It turned to somebody who belongs to the INSEE's domain. Acharyya as well is classically quoted in that in the judgment of the Supreme Court. Conditions that are now beginning to show light are very understated in terms of our claim to what INSEE's engagement has been. And the most recent one is, of course, the ocean accounts, which are just getting started. Again, INSEE has a very big role to play out there. So, I think if we forefront that, we will be able to come to what you feel would be a more open exchange with policymakers. And finally, I would stop by saying that if you look at the work of people like Kenneth Arrow, Arthur Gupta's most recent work, of course, of biodiversity, but they've been writing about this for almost 20-25 years now. And they're forefronting the idea that, of course, GDP, which was conventionally seen as the most important indicator of welfare and economic gain, we feel that they have been arguing that that's really not something that we should be looking at all. We have to go back to 1776 and Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and they redefined the wealth of nations not that as physical capital, but the inclusion of human capital and national capital. And I think that's where economists fail.
Of the Inclusive Wealth of Nations 2018 report of UNEP. So which essentially took into consideration the changes in fact in human capital and physical capital and natural capital from 1990 to 2040. That was the 2020 report is supposed to come out. You're right in terms of my mentioning those studies by Acharyya. The first association of INSEE with the policymaking machinery happened in 2005, and that is essentially the 2006 report under the Kanchan Chopra Committee on Net Present Value (NPV). But the issue is that was not INSEE as a body, that was Institute of Economic Growth. Then, in fact, including Acharyya's cases also with her institution and her involvement. The study was cited, but not really a committee under her. The latest association with Ecological Economics Committee of the government of the Supreme Court has been with me, because I have been asked to revise the NPV criteria of the report that has been submitted to the Supreme Court, which they have accepted. Now the ministry is going to contest that. These are going to get reviewed very good. Anyway, thanks for your interventions. So now this is open to the floor. We should end
Regulation of the water resources. That is some kind of valuation. The question is that how the optimum trade-off is possible between, as you have already pointed out, which is totally desirable. This is a very big question to me. Even sometimes, my teacher, Professor Arun, I did my PhD under his supervision. Also, I was my direct teacher. Sometimes I asked Dr. Acharyya, but sir, do not respond as well in a positive sense. Yes, this is an issue, but we are not in a position to integrate this interaction. Starting from
Center for Development and Environment Policy. INSEE Secretariat was hosted at the IIM in Calcutta on those 2 initial years. And my interaction with Professor Sengupta drew me to ecological economics, because I came there as a classical mountain ecologist, water resource specialist, and very little knowledge of economics. To some extent, I knew the ecology, body of knowledge, which doesn't have an immediate policy application or decision application. I was invited by the Ministry of Environment and Forest to give an opinion on whether the Doon Valley limestone mining should be continued or not. It could be a very simple ecological representation, but my exposure to INSEE, first 2 years and then continuously further years, took me to exercise a little bit of economics in it, and that worked like wonders. But I think it was not a totally zero result. It's a very difficult one. Throughout the world, this problem is going on. And in INSEE, we also have this problem. But I think we have some positive response. And in my own personal understanding, I have benefited very much from ecological economics as applied to Himalayan water systems. And ORF has published a monograph where interdisciplinarization has been put into a methodological process. How do you get to generate integrated knowledge? And my student and co-author Modak and myself, we call it SINC, System of Integrated Knowledge. And that has economics in it, that has ecology in it, that has policy sciences in it.
First exposed to environmental economics, it was essentially about valuation because we were not aware of the functioning of the ecological services or the things that are around us. That was the need of the hour. I mean, what economists largely did was to bring into forefront the marginal value of the changes. That is the beauty of economics. So you're aware of the marginal changes. It is important to make your point. So that actually continued, say, at least around 2000. In 2015, very significantly, one of the important journals in environmental economics, Jeena, actually came out with a special edition which actually named that it is no longer environmental economics separately. It should be tagged with development economics. Why? Because they argue now the period of consensus building that environment is valuable, that every chain of events, including even the biodiversity components, have got its own value, is now well established in the popular literature. That just like a book like Jadavpur says, why is it that Zambia, which has got a large, vast amount of natural resource, and Netherlands, is just placed in a precarious environmental situation with rivers and waters all around? Why is Netherlands faring better than Zambia? What is the resource scarce? I mean, why is it that despite having economic values in large numbers, in case of Zambia, I mean, if you just go on to churn numbers out for Zambia, you will see it has got a huge natural capital. Why is it not getting translated into other forms of economic development process? Who should develop and converge to is towards incorporating this evidence-based policy. Whether it is working for development issues or not, whether it is working for environmental issues or not. But I congratulate my friend for bringing out such a nice volume and my respect to Professor arguments. Thank you.
Also, the research foundation. So my question is primarily addressed to you, but thereafter anybody would want to take. So when we are speaking of issues and challenges pertaining to environmental economics, and we are also trying to look at the policy relevance, right, of the field, the modern policy debates that come out of it. How central do you think is the role of the private sector, the corporate sector, in this whole discussion, as stakeholders, also as conversation drivers, and obviously as enablers of actions that could benefit the environment as well. So also, with this,
when we were smaller in number, probably it was okay. that 8 billion, I don't think it's a number okay. Just the other day, we saw this new publication. I mean, it's been a series, been in the making for a while now, where a bunch of scholars from different disciplines are looking at thresholds we are crossing. And they have a framework with 9 different boundaries. And the most recent thing is 6 of the boundaries we've already crossed. But now it seems we do know. What is socially desirable for the current world need not necessarily be desirable for the lot that is yet to come. How do we resolve this? I mean, Professor Amartya Sen talked about in his writings long back, factoring in generations yet to come. How do we resolve this? I mean, so that's the question for everybody. And because I work on the ground, I'm having to respond to situations where people are being exposed to the impacts. I mean, we are talking about climate change, we're talking about development, we're talking about natural capital. So there is degradation of natural capital. There are obviously development inequalities.
Any kind of problem, we can solve it with technology. That's number one. And secondly, about the policies related to environment, I think that also depends on how much of a democracy we have. Whether the people can actually talk about the problems of environment which is heard by the government. Now, what we see basically in a global context is that we don't have that kind of a global democracy now. So it's as Professor Hazra was saying, it's a war that no one can stop between Ukraine and Russia, and the war is about oil and drinks. So the whole idea of putting your environmental concerns to the government is becoming more and more of a challenge. You can't have it only from the institution. So I think the institutions play a major role in kind of convincing the corporates that you have to follow certain laws. And here I remember that once upon a time, Pastor Kasduki started this green GDP. I think Jairam Ghosh was the environment minister at that time. And we don't know what happened to them. So that whole argument of environment affecting the policies, having an impact, as my friend Kushik was saying, would depend on also, I think, the democracy of the system.
Submit each and every year. So they have to submit TGS, those are sustainability index. That is 100 marks, and out of that 100 marks, 2 marks is for biodiversity. Okay, so they have to submit that report every year. Not only that, we have already heard that NFP already released, NFP recommendation already released. So now every year they have to submit NFP how they are protecting their biodiversity or natural resources. So that has to be submitted in every country. So these are the responsibilities already mandated, and corporate has to do that.
This recent issue of the INSEE journal has a special section on political economy. So we are alive to the issue, and we are past conferences have had sessions on political economy. So it's something that is, I think, pretty much central to INSEE. And even if economists don't talk much about it, there are lots of other engaged academics who are part of INSEE or who come to the conferences or submit to the journal who engage with that area. Second thing is about the private sector and its role, and very important point of how large corporates are getting into reporting frameworks, the GRI and similar such frameworks. It's become mandatory part of the BSE requirement of BBSR now, so there will be sustainability reporting that will be happening. However, it's also true that the companies which are the most polluting have the best reports that come up. So, take it with a pinch of salt and with all the rules that apply for these other discussions. But there are some good ones out there, and there are some not so good ones out there. Reporting will solve some of the problems, but not all. It will at least give greater disclosure, there will be greater inquiry into what's going on in terms of both the governance part of it and the citizens part of it. Economists have struggled with the idea of a discount rate. Should it be anything greater than 0 or not? Should should be something that we value even more, because our future generations are what we save for. This is what we produce for. It's not just for ourselves. So it's pretty central. Have we solved the issue? No, we haven't solved the issue, because there is a social decision function. And again, I go back to Kenneth Arrow here, because he was the one who was one of the pioneers of this social welfare function and how societies make decisions. And the reason we don't come to an agreement is because everybody has different objective functions. And as long as that exists, and there is no we like the idea of democracy, but unless we have what is described as a dictatorship, in the terms that everybody's preferences are aligned, not that there is one single ruler, we will not have this single vision of what we think needs to be done. And I think a large part of our lack of aggressive movement towards climate change, adaptation and mitigation is because of that, because every different stakeholder has a different objective function. And we don't agree on what needs to be done, even though we sign treaties at international level. So, even though we understand the problem, we don't have a solution. And that particular stakeholder that's where public policy will move. And if it's moving in a certain direction, it's a clear symptom that some stakeholder is very strong in the system. So, thank you.
Just to know the effect, but the informational requirements are very high. Very high. There is some estimate.
Yes.
Okay, so ecology and environment and economics, we are talking about carbon emissions. So when we are talking about something like environment and emissions, I think we missed out something like energy. 70% of the world's carbon emissions or even other emissions are actually coming from either consumption or production. So we are talking, I want to pick up one more thing is about geography. Because when we are talking about energy and renewable energy, things like that, geography is very important. Because we have found many studies where areas which has very rich deposits of coal belts are actually very slower in adopting renewable energy. They are more fossil fuel based. So that is one more thing. Because resource spread or concentration is one thing that determines. That is one more thing which affects environment. And finally, I'd also like to, one question was on energy. And finally, when we are talking about something like democracy, I find the entire electoral system, the agenda is being made. Very little mention is made about environment. Only I think last election in Tamil Nadu, where the agenda of environment have come into play. So I think how people are taking environments, not only the amount of democracy or measure, but I think what people are taking into environment is very important, and that can, I think, influence the agenda and bring in more environment. The kind of resources we need and the expertise we need. Everything is fine when we discuss very intelligent ecological aspects and economic aspects and various issues. So I can give enough number of examples where we struggle to do a proper ecological analysis. So recently, right now I am doing a study on the social economy of dried fish, where we try to examine the value social economy aspects of dried fish in the Andhra coast. So we come across a lot of fishes which require actually ecological economic kind of modeling kind of work. But one thing which we observe is that the sustainable harvesting part is there. And then there are market forces, there are different actors coming into it, different stakeholders, and certain aspects, when I say free share to the crew members, and crew members used to sell it for maybe 10 rupees per unit, 100 kilo or something like that. But later they found a use for this trash fish for poultry feed. This is basically a feed for aquaculture and all. So it has given the market for trash fish, and now mechanized boats have an incentive to do more and more sustainable fish. So it is not very easy, to differentiate and to untangle the complexities. It's not very easy when at the field level, and especially in the Indian context, we need the resources are limited for us to go further, explore the things, both the expertise and how to bring them together. That's a very challenge. research.
And those who drill those bags for 300 million tons of oil in the North Sea, that watering down all the environmental, so, or the corporates, by 2014 to 22, as indicated by Calcutta Pride, 270 projects have been approved in the ESA's economically sensitive areas and protected areas. And mostly the projects have been taken up by the corporates, though they have corporate social responsibilities. So I think as INSEE and environmental economists in the business sector, but also in the government sector, because they don't know, as Professor Jadavpur was saying, unless you tell them with such kind of monetary value, they don't understand. Because I was in an NGT team with this, that was their demand. And while I appreciate their concern, but while fly ash can damage the mangrove, that's a different question. The point is, our power plants, as you were talking about energy, need to be shut down if we cannot dispose this fly. And Bangladesh will open hand asking for this fly ash because they don't have any cement. So I cannot just politically, it will be incorrect for me to decide that stop or heavily fine because they are so underdeveloped picking industry. So there lies a what you call trade-off or whatever, that how minimize you can do the damage and what maximum benefits can be given to the society. School level they have introduced environment. Why not for the training of the government and the corporate sector? We take it up, design something so that we can at least have some learn and they can take risk, but of course, informed risk they will take. Otherwise, they will destroy it. Think about Oceanography. All signals are there that is going to disaster. Still, we are not stopping the overloading of projects and everything flows into hydro in the fragile ecosystem.
Just talk about the focus on it's the role of the state at two ends. There is one on the community base and the other on saying something that you raised about corporate social responsibility. I would like to just point out that it is governance that is the main issue here. Governance. How far is governance good governance, or to what extent it is actually happening at the point of the role of the state. And what I want to mention here is, I think in the foreword, Professor Sugata points out on one harsh reality. He talks about this harsh reality that we need to think about. It says ministries and international organizations graft specific features of nature into models as and when the need arises. Because I think you also question what happens to the reporting in terms of corporate social responsibility. Is it really socially responsible?
It's also because the entire debate on development and environment was not brought up by economics, and rather the very interface or that the human society is embedded in the broader ecosystem was thought of much earlier than that and possibly acknowledged in the developmental domain in 2005 in a much more succinct way. And that there in fact, I must mention this, that INSEE members were inextricably involved in that process. And that process came up as a landmark publication known as the DNA Ecosystems. There were 3 INSEE members who were involved. One of them is here in the room, Professor Mukhopadhyay, the other was Professor Achiransu, the third was Professor Ghosh. And that essentially
development and the natural capital phenomena, in which it has become clear to most of us in this room that our basic understanding of the critical issues facing the world today needs to evolve significantly. And as Professor knowledge to the exercise. However, good economics today demands that we integrate and manage nature better in thinking and practice. However, effort in putting together this volume on environmental economics in developing countries, issues and challenges, with a stellar set of contributions from eminent environmental economists, and Mr. Anirban Sharma for bringing us all together for this discussion and so successfully setting the stage for this conversation with his remarks. A special thank you to our distinguished discussants, Professor Sugata Hazra, Professor of Oceanography, School of Oceanographic Studies, Jadavpur University, Professor Jeena Srinivasan, Associate Professor, Center for Economics and Social Studies, Professor Pranab Mukhopadhyay, Professor of Economics, Business School, and Professor Sumana, Professor, Department of Geography, Calcutta University, for sharing your experiences and thoughtful insights that have not only added depth to our understanding but also reminded us of the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration in addressing the challenges of our time. I want to express my gratitude to the organizing team at the Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata, and the supporting team at the Indian Society for Ecological Economics for bringing us together and managing the event so seamlessly. And a big thanks to all members of the audience for your presence and active participation. We hope to see you soon at our future events. Until then, you can follow us for more updates on Twitter. Please feel free to scan the QR codes that you see on screen. I would also like to request everyone to drop in their cards kindly here. We have a basket right here, so that we can keep in touch with you regarding future collaborations. And of course, lastly, none of our events are complete without